next guest today on The Strategerist is Rear Admiral John Kirby. He is currently the director of the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics after a long career in the military and then our government as a spokesperson and communications professional. He served in both the Obama and Biden administrations as White House National Security Communications Advisor, leading Pentagon communications, as well as serving the Department of Defense and Department of State. Welcome to The Strategerist, John.
You bet. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're lucky to get to hear today from someone who's got just this extensive experience, first in the military and then working with our government. And if I looked at your bio right, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it looks like you have about 40 years of public service under your belt. Is that about right?
Yes, sir. 1986.
1986 to 1986 on. How did you start down this path of public service? And not only that, what kept you in this path?
I mean, first it started with a career in the Navy, which really wasn't much of a choice. I grew up in a big Irish Catholic family. My dad, five boys, one girl. My dad wanted all of us boys to join the military. My grandfather was in the Navy in World War I. My father was on an aircraft carrier in the 1950s, and he felt adamantly that we all owed the country some of our time, and we were going to do that in the military. So even though Nixon got rid of the draft in 1974 in the Kirby house, there was conscription. You could pick your branch, but we were all going to go. And so three of us went in the Navy. One went in the Marine Corps, one went in the Army. I'm the only one that chose the officer path. And my intention was, do my 4 years and get out like my brothers were doing and go find, meaningful work in the private sector. But the thing is, I just kind of fell in love with it. I fell in love with being on ships. I fell in love with sailors. I fell in love with the mission and the traditions of the Navy. And they kept giving me great opportunities one after the other that I just couldn't say no to. So eventually, before you know it, you look in the rearview mirror and you got 20 plus years under the keel, and I just stayed. I just stayed for as long as they would let me.
I think that's an important message for kids today is this idea that the military is a place where there are opportunities, and we all kind of look at this. Well, you have to do the one path, whatever that path is that's been defined for you, whether that's higher education or trade school. But the military is a great place to learn so many different skills and have opportunities.
No, that's exactly right. It's not for everybody. And I don't want to come across like I'm being some kind of heavy-handed recruiter here. But the services each have their own skill sets, their own capabilities, their own the pros and their own cons. And if somebody's considering public service, I'd highly recommend to look at the military and just take a look at the opportunities there, because not only are you going to get incredible leadership, management, and just social opportunity, you're going to get education. I mean, the U.S. Navy paid for not one, but two master's degrees for me. They sent me all over the world and exposed me to cultures and to people and to ideas that I never would have been exposed to had I gotten out after those 4 years. So, if you're open-minded and you're willing to experience and to explore, then the U.S. military might very well be the right thing for you.
And so eventually you transitioned from the ship and into Washington. Can you talk about that and kind of the next step, the next phase of your career?
Yeah. So when I retired from the Navy in 2015 as a Rear Admiral, that was another decision point, to use a term by President Bush.
I think I've got one behind me here.
And I didn't know what to do. The Navy was willing to keep me on and give me another assignment. But then John Kerry at the State Department was looking for a spokesman, and I had been the Pentagon press secretary under Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel. In fact, I was the first uniformed officer to ever be Pentagon press secretary. So going over to work for Mr. Kerry at the State Department was very, very attractive. However, it would require me to retire early from the Navy and give up that uniform. And I got to tell you that I wrestled with that. That was really a hard decision. The Navy was all I had ever known, and getting up every morning and throwing on that uniform was just a part of my DNA. And to have to give all that up and go work at the State Department was where it was frightening. But I'm glad I did it. I did make the jump. And I tell you, those 2 years at the State Department were some of the most formative years I've ever had in government service, and certainly as a spokesman. We brief the press every day. Secretary Kerry was a terrific boss, very accessible, very open-minded to my mistakes, and kept me close and on the road with him everywhere he went. It was terrific, and that set me up. After the Obama administration ended, I went to go work at CNN. That set me up well for a job as a commentator, and I taught at Georgetown a little bit. And I think those opportunities set me up for when President Biden came into office to go back into government. Everything is cumulative. And you can literally go back in time and say, well, if I hadn't gotten this job, I wouldn't have gotten that job, and so on and so on and so on. And there's one, we didn't ask about this, but I do want to make the point that when I talk to young people today, and now I'm the director of the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, so I'm talking to young people all the time, I tell them not to be afraid to say yes. You just never know what that next great opportunity is going to look like. And if you had told 23-year-old Ensign Kirby that he was going to be, briefing the White House press corps from the briefing room, he would have laughed at you. All my friends would have laughed at you. My mother would have laughed at you. But you just can't be afraid to try and to say yes. And so it was a leap of faith. That was the first. I shouldn't say the first. It was one of the most significant, though, leaps of faith I had to make. Throwing off the uniform and retiring a little bit earlier than I wanted to go work as a civilian political appointee at the State Department. But man, I'm really glad I did. I think it made a huge difference.
You mentioned as part of this journey the time at the podium, and I want to talk about the podium in a little bit, but everybody pictures the podium and briefing the press. What is the day-to-day job, though, of being a communications leader in the highest seats in our government? What is that job really like outside of the podium that everybody can envision?
You're right. The podium is not the mainstay of your day or even your week, depending on where you are in the government. The mainstay is two things, really. It's one, relationships. It's spending your day really trying to build relationships inside the institution you work, with the boss, with the policy experts, with all the directorates, but also with the press corps. I can't tell you how much time I spent every day from the time I got into the building until I went home, where I was working the bullpen. I was walking around, finding out what was on their minds, what they were covering, learning about them and their families. I mean, building those relationships is a real big time investment that absolutely helps you do a better job when you are at the podium, or when you need to step in and try to correct a story that you think is going in a direction that it shouldn't. The second thing is curiosity, is informing yourself. I would start my day at the Pentagon, at the State Department, and at the National Security Council with an intelligence briefing, my own intelligence briefing, not the boss's. I would want to sit down with intelligence analysts so that they could help me understand what I knew were going to be the questions I was going to get that day. Whether I was going to the podium or not, I was going to be talking to reporters. So you want to be informed about what's going on in the world, so you actually have a contextual understanding of the geopolitical environment, but B, so that you don't cross the line, that you know the left and right boundaries between what's classified and what's not, and how far I can go. And then, it's all day. You're reading policy papers, you're reading the press as the news unfolds throughout the day. And you're talking to people all day long. I mean, I can't, on any given day, particularly at the NSC, you're blessed to be surrounded by policy experts who have PhDs and have written books and have taught classes about all these issues. And I would just grab the phone and talk to them for 20 minutes just to get smart on something that, like immigration, that I knew nothing about, but I knew I was going to get asked about. So it's relationship building and it's informing yourself. And that's the real gist of your day as a spokesman from on any given average day in Washington.
And so as a spokesman, how do you balance this idea, though, that A, you need to keep the public informed and the public needs to know what they need to know to live their lives, to elect their officials. But at the same time, there are a lot of things that do have to be kept secret, but if nothing else, because of its classification status. But how do you balance that as an information officer?
Well, that's one of the reasons I would get an intel briefing first and foremost, was to make sure I knew what was out there in the information space and how classified it was. And then it's really just making sure that reporters know, and they know when you're talking to them, that you're giving them as much as you can without violating that. You cannot absolutely ever violate operational security or classified information. But you can do, and I did this several times, you work with the intelligence community to see, is there a way that I can say this instead of that? So I would, it was not uncommon for me to be on the phone with the intelligence communities. At the Pentagon, it was DIA. At the State Department, they have INS, their own intelligence bureau. And then at the NSC, of course, it was the CIA and DNI, who were very helpful in keeping me honest. The other thing that I can't take any credit for this, but I do want to stress it, that our national security advisor in the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan, did, which I think was brilliant, was foster this something he called strategic downgrades. So this was when we would see things in the intelligence that we felt public disclosure would advance our national security objectives, to work with the intelligence community to see if we can get, if not all of it, at least some of it declassified for public consumption. A great example of this, just a level set, is a couple of weeks or so before Putin invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. We saw intelligence of how he was going to create a pretext for that invasion, how he was going to justify it to the world. They were going to set off a bomb at the residence or the working office of a Russian official in the Donbass, and they were going to literally take corpses out of morgues and spray them around the grounds of this bomb, and as victims, to portray as victims. And they were going to hire actors to act as wounded walking around this site and blame the Ukrainians for a terrorist attack, and that was going to be the justification for, and they were going to videotape it and all. So we got this intel, and Mr. Sullivan worked with the intelligence community. They got most of it downgraded, and I, at the Pentagon, my State Department spokesman colleague, and the White House press secretary all went to the podium and laid it out for the American people. Here's how we think Putin's going to, justify this invasion, and it set the Russians back. They ended up delaying what they actually did do a car bomb, but they delayed it a couple of weeks because they weren't sure exactly how the Americans knew this, and it kind of threw their decision-making loop into a bit of disarray. Now, again, did he do this? Did Putin set off a car bomb? Yes, but he didn't bring out corpses from the morgue, and he didn't hire actors, and nobody believed it when he did it because the Americans already punctured the lie. Mm-hmm. There's an old saw by Mark Twain that, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still tying on its shoes. And I used to believe you couldn't beat a lie to the punch, but I was wrong. I think you can beat a lie to the punch if you know it's coming. And we were lucky that we were dealing with leaders in the intelligence community who really understood the value of declassifying this and getting ahead of an enemy's narrative, stealing their lie from them. So that was a really powerful lesson that I hope future administrations, heal to.
And it also paints an important picture of Vladimir Putin and who he is.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it exposed the selfishness and the complete disingenuousness of the argument that he was making for why he needed to move into Ukraine.
So do you remember the first time you stood at the podium, whether that was at the Pentagon or in the White House? Do you remember that first time and what that felt like?
Yeah, I was scared to death. I was still a Navy captain at the time, and Leon Panetta was Secretary of Defense. And when he came in after Bob Gates left, he wanted two spokespeople. He wanted somebody, a civilian, and he brought over his spokesman from the CIA, George Little, to handle the policy and the politics of the Pentagon podium. But he wanted a military guy to come over to help George to handle the operation and the military stuff. So George and I were co-spokespeople at the Pentagon, and we briefed together. And I tell you that having George with me definitely made it easier because I wasn't just up there all by myself. Right. And as a military guy, it was great to have George be able to handle the policy stuff that I wasn't very well equipped to do. But it was still, even though it was comforting to have a good friend, and George and I did become close, it was still a little nerve-wracking. I mean, because the whole time you're a public affairs officer in the Navy, as I was, your job is to help get your boss ready for those things.
Right.
You write their talking points, you help them with speeches, you give them advice before they go out to the podium or do a television interview. All of a sudden, it was just me, and I had to prepare myself. And then when the questions come at you and you realize it's live, and that every word you're saying is going to be digested in sometimes real time, it certainly adds a little bit of stress to it. But eventually, I got not only used to it, but I actually began to enjoy it. I really did. I mean, all the way up to my time at the National Security Council, some of the best days I had in the job were those days when I could go to the podium, because I really did appreciate the value of having your policies held open to the scrutiny of an independent press, and how important that is, and the message, the optic that sends to people around the world.
You read my mind on what the next question was going to be, which is this relationship with the press. And President Bush has talked about it several times, of where it can feel adversarial, but really we need the press, and the press needs officials who are willing to talk about what's going on. Can you talk about how you approached that relationship with the press, and was it adversarial in your mind?
No, I never really saw it as adversarial. I certainly, there were days when it was more challenging than others, but I never saw it. I never saw them as being adversarial. I saw them as doing their jobs, and their job isn't to be your friend. Their job isn't to advocate for the policy. Their job is to ask tough questions. Their job is to get at the why. If I go back and look at all three podiums, Pentagon, State, and White House, that I stood at, each press corps is very different, and they approach the issues of the day differently. But the one thing that's very much in common with all three is they want the why. They want to understand the context and the decision-making process behind what we're doing. And that, I think, rejuvenated me every time I went, because it forced me to get beyond the data and the facts and the evidence, and really understand where my boss was coming from, and how he or she made the decisions that they made. And that's what you need a press for. And I'll tell you, the other thing is, back to my issue of my point about scrutiny. The other thing I found about constant interaction with the press was it helped, I think, policymakers make better decisions. The best leaders I've worked for were individuals that weren't afraid to admit they might be wrong, and weren't afraid to maybe pull back a decision after it had been given the scrutiny of tough reporting from very, very good journalists. Bob Gates, it was a USA Today story by a guy named Tom Vanderbrook about the MRAPs, and about this is the mine-resistant vehicles that were deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, which I know President Bush is very well familiar with. But in the Obama administration, the U.S. military, the Army in particular, was kind of slow rolling the development of the MRAP and the deployment of the MRAP. And it took a press report in USA Today to really light that on fire for Bob Gates, and then he lit the Army on fire to get those things developed quicker. The press coverage can make a huge difference, which is why I believe it's so important, back to my point about relationships, to have those discussions with them before you go to the podium. So yes, look, when I briefed during the Afghan withdrawal, or I briefed the Gaza war, there were tough questions. But I was very rarely surprised by those questions, because I was having conversations with the press throughout the day, throughout the week. I knew where their heads were. It didn't make the moment any easier, but it certainly helped me prepare a little bit for where they were going to come at.
I know we're very grateful at the Bush Institute of a free and independent press, and we're grateful for all the work that those people do. It's not the path to riches, but it's an important path, and it's important that our officials see it that way, and we're grateful that you did.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. No matter what party you represent, to stand up for freedom of the press, and to value those relationships and the role that they play, should not ever be taken advantage of or taken for granted. It isn't always easy. It's not supposed to be easy. And again, the best leaders that I saw were the ones who didn't really want it to be easy. They valued the scrutiny that the press gave an issue. When we deployed troops to Western Africa in 2014 to deal with the Ebola outbreak, Secretary Hagel was advised by the Army that they did not need to quarantine the troops coming back home because they weren't going to be treating patients. They were going to be building runways and hospital clinics and that kind of thing. And so he took the advice and off we went. And the press corps kept probing why we wouldn't do some kind of quarantine for the troops coming home. And ultimately, families in some of the military communities where these troops were deploying from, they were concerned about no quarantine. Eventually, Secretary Hagel, through the scrutiny of an independent press and through the tough questions, the legitimate questions, changed his mind. And he said, you know what? I think we've got to reconsider this, and we're gonna go ahead and put our troops through a self-monitoring regimen when they get home, even though they wouldn't have treated any Ebola patients. It was humility, and it was the ability to understand that there are fears and concerns out there that the press will cover that you can't ignore. And I remember going up to Secretary Hagel right before I had to go to the podium that day after he made the decision to go ahead and quarantine. I said, sir, for weeks I've been telling people that we weren't going to quarantine and that you didn't think it was necessary. And now you want me to go to the podium and say, we're going to quarantine. How do I do that? And he put his hand on my shoulder. I'll never forget this moment. And he said, John, I'm the Secretary of Defense of the United States of America, and I changed my mind. And you can just tell him that. And it worked. And it was an honest moment. And I think it made a big difference.
Boy, so what you're saying is sometimes the truth just works, huh?
Yeah, sometimes you just, and to change your mind is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. Yep. It's a sign of humility. And I worry we've kind of lost that in the way we deal with the press. To admit that you've maybe made a mistake or that you have come to a different conclusion is somehow seen as a weakness. Or
that information has changed. Scenarios change, information changes, what the information that's available changes, and that leads to a new decision, which is not a bad thing.
That's leadership.
Yep.
That is leadership.
Can you tell us about your favorite moment at the White House podium or one that really sticks out in your mind?
There's one, yeah. But it actually happened after the podium. So this was, it was shortly after the Gaza war started, after October 7th. And I had joined Karine at the White House podium to give a briefing. And there was a meeting scheduled with President Biden in the executive mansion on the second floor, right after, right at sort of the tail end of the briefing. So I knew I had to run right from the briefing room to the mansion for this meeting. It was a meeting on the Middle East. It was a meeting about the war. And we had all the policy experts, and Jake Sullivan was there, of course. It was a small meeting, but an important one with President Biden, and he wanted me there. Well, the briefing went a little long. I got more questions than I expected that I would, and so I as soon as I got done, I was late for the meeting, but I dashed over there, and I went into the room. And when you're in a meeting like that, in the executive mansion, it's not a secure facility, but you aren't really supposed to have your phone in a meeting with when you're sitting down with the president. But I was late. And I was scared of being late. You don't want to come late to a meeting with the president of the United States. So I forgot, and I left my phone in my back pocket. And I sat down, and we started doing the meeting, and my phone starts dinging. I'm getting a text, and I'm trying to grab at the phone to stop it from dinging, and the president goes, "Who's texting you?" And I looked at my phone, and it was my mother. My mom, she used to watch every briefing, and I would get a long text after each one with criticism. She didn't like my tie. I used my hands too much. I rarely ever got one where she would say, "Hey, that was great. I understood everything that you said." So I get this long text from my mom, and I he asked me who it was, and I just said, "Mr. President, I'm very sorry. It's my mother." And he goes, "Call her." And I said, "No, sorry, I'm sorry, I'm late, Mr. President. I can take this outside if you want. I'm very sorry. I don't need to call her." And he goes, He goes, if this is a direct quote. He said, "I'm the president of the United States, and I'm telling you to call your mother." So I call her, and I got it to my ear, and it's ringing. And he says, "Give me the phone." And I said, "Well, Mr. President, she hasn't answered yet. I don't even know if she's going to answer." And he goes, "Give me the phone. I want it before she picks up." So I hand my phone to the president, and my mother thinks it's me. So I can hear her answering it. "Hey, honey, how are you? Did you get my text?" And he goes, "Mrs. Kirby, this is President Biden. How you doing today?" And they have this 10-minute conversation where they talked about how proud he was of the job I was doing, and apparently he had seen the briefing, and I didn't know that. Before the meeting, he was watching me at the podium, and I guess he thought I did a pretty good job, and he told that to my mom, which was kind of cool. But I mean, that was probably my most favorite moment tied to a briefing, and my mom still gushes about her conversation with President Biden.
But that brings up a good point, though, is that everybody in these important roles that are dealing with the biggest issues in the world on any given day, they're all family people. And how did you balance? What was your approach to balancing your family life with your professional obligations and your obligations to the country?
I'll tell you, not well. The biggest regret that I have, and I have lots of them, just like anybody else, but the biggest regret that I have over 40 years in public service is I did not make time enough for my family. If I could go back and do it all over again, I would take more vacations. I would come home earlier. I wouldn't stay at the office quite so late. I might say no to travel where I could have sent my deputy on the trip instead of me going. I made the mistake, which I should never have made because I was warned against it before I joined the Navy, but I made the mistake of trying to be the indispensable man, to be the only one that could do X, Y, Z in any given job that I was in. Now, some could argue, well, you did okay, so that work ethic must have helped, and that there's a case to be made for that. But I think I should have spent more time with my kids and my wife, and I really do regret that. I did not strike a proper life-work balance, and boy, if I could go back and change it, it would be that. I think towards the end of my career, I got a little bit better about it, but not as good as I should have.
But you can't go back and change time, but you can say that so that other people can hear it that maybe still have the opportunity to do that at an earlier point in their career. So I think that's as important as anything else. Maybe in the end, you'll have helped a lot more people than you would have otherwise.
I hope so. I mean, before I joined the Navy, my grandfather, the one that was on a battleship in World War I, the USS Utah, he told me, if you want to know how critical you are to the U.S. Navy, stick your fist into a bucket of water and pull it out and see what kind of hole you leave. And it was a reminder to remember the machine is the machine, and it's going to keep moving. The Navy's going to keep doing what it does with or without you. Yes, you're a cog in that machine, and you're a critical team member, but you, like everybody else, is not indispensable. And this took me a while to learn. Part of good leadership is training the next generation, making sure that there is no hole when you leave. That when you do go on vacation, your team can still function without you, and your boss can still make the decisions that he or she needs to make. It doesn't mean that you're unnecessary. It just means that you've done a good job making sure your team can function to its maximum potential. And I didn't understand that, not well enough, not till I was too late. So yeah, that would be my advice for anybody who's beginning a career in public services, is work yourself out of a job and be proud of that. Be proud of the fact that you're bringing up a whole new generation to come after you, and that when you take a job, you should already be thinking, literally in day one, who's going to come behind me when it's time for me to go? And there's always going to be a time to go. Who's the best person to come behind me? That's a mark of mature leadership that regrettably it took me too long to figure out.
Well, we're glad you're sharing it with us here, and you're probably sharing a lot of lessons now. You're currently at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics, and I was reading up on it. It says it's a nonpartisan program, yet the word politics is in the title. How does that work?
That's exactly the whole point, right? The idea is that we're trying to expose young men and women to careers in public service and politics, no matter what their beliefs are, no matter what their ideology is, no matter who they vote for. And this is one of the big reasons I took the job, because first of all, it was a stretch for me. I've never run for office. I don't have a long history with politics. But I love that it's nonpartisan, that we really do make an effort to expose these students to viewpoints across the spectrum, left and right and center. And I think that's really important today. I mean, when you look at where we are as a country, very polarized, very divided, places like the IOP in Chicago, I think, are critically important. We just took a group of students to Boston, 15 of them, because I wanted to expose them to the history of the American Revolution. Here we are, the 250th anniversary. And students in Chicago, there's not a lot of American Revolutionary War sites here in the Midwest. There's some, but not a lot. And I thought it was important for them to go. So we went to the Lexington and Concord, and they got to see the reenactment. And we took them aboard the USS Constitution, and they really got a chance to soak in a little bit of American history. But we also had conversations throughout the trip about the meaning of the Revolution and where we are as a country now, and whether we've met the aspirations of the founding fathers and the degree to which maybe we haven't. It was a good, honest conversation, and students came to that conversation from across the political spectrum. It was really gratifying to see. They didn't always agree with one another on any particular topic, but they disagreed agreeably, respectfully. And I think that's one of the most important things we can do at the IOP. We've got to set up in this country, we've got to set up more opportunities for people to disagree in a respectful tone and bring back civil discourse to this country. And that's why I took the job. I think it's important.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you have to lay down what you believe and not stand up for what you believe, but it does mean that the person that you are speaking to that you don't agree with isn't necessarily your enemy. It's just someone who doesn't agree with you, but you're still trying to do what's best for this country.
That's exactly right. It couldn't be said any better, and that's really what the IOP is all about.
What is your experience with young people so far? Are you surprised by how either disenchanted they are or by how excited they are about public service? What are we looking at for our next generation right now?
I mean, on one hand, I feel very sanguine about the future when I'm around these students, because they are so curious and energetic and open-minded. Even though their minds aren't changing, they're open-minded to other views. And when I look at some of these students, I feel good about where we're going as a country, because they've got the talent, they've got the skill, they certainly have the intellect. I mean, I also this idea crossed my mind a couple of times during this trip to Boston, but when I was thinking back to my own college days, I mean, I know all I wanted to do was go to the beach and drink beer, and I skipped a lot of class. I just wanted to graduate. These students today, at least the ones I'm exposed to, I mean, they are serious. They are sober-minded when it comes to their studies, but they are equally, and this gets to the dichotomy that you've sort of alluded to, they're equally a little bit skeptical about the future they're walking into. They look around them and they see institutions either failing or really being challenged right from the core. They see hyper-partisanship and polarization and vicious vitriol on social media that I didn't have to deal with when I was their age. And then there's the challenge of artificial intelligence and whether or not they'll even have a job when they graduate. So there's a lot of worry, and there's some skepticism that comes with their energy and their enthusiasm for the future. So it's a mix. And I think it almost depends on, when you're talking to them, what issue you're talking about, as to how optimistic they're going to be about the future. Again, that's why I think just being around them is so important right now. My public service is over. I'm done. I'm an old guy, and I'm not going to pretend that the way I did it is the right way for them to do it, because I grew up in a different generation with a different set of challenges. but I do believe I have some kernels of wisdom I can pass on, and I have a Rolodex I can lean on to help them make connections, find jobs or internships, have conversations with people they admire and they respect, and I want to do that. This whole discussion with you started with my public service, and I believe even though I'm out of government, working on a college campus is a form of public service. It's a chance to, back to that indispensable man, right? It's a chance to make right the wrongs of my career in making sure that I'm not indispensable, that this new generation can come up and take my place and then some.
Well, Rear Admiral Kirby, what a career. And thank you so much for spending this time to reflect on it with us and pass on what you've learned. And this has been, I've really enjoyed it as a communications person myself, and to learn from you has been exciting. And I hope we get to continue working together here in the years to come.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to come back on anytime.
Well, let's do it. John, thank you so much for everything. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Very good to be with you.